Hello, friends. I always feel like a newscaster when I hit record. I'm like, good evening. Welcome to our channel. So if you are new here, I'm Dr. Heather Rhodes. We have Leisha Drews with us as well. I'm a holistic pharmacist that focuses on simplifying hormones for women. And Leisha is a functional
diagnostic nutrition practitioner.
My brain always flips the N and the D. When we talk about it, what do I call? Do I call it an FDN or do I call it an FND?
I think you've called it a few different things. It's fine.
What is the program called?
It's FDN.
FDN. I'm going to get this. Okay, FDN, Functional Diagnostic Nutritional Practitioner. Did I do it right? And
yes.
RN.
Yes.
And so we're here just to make sure that you guys have the information you need to have about working with your body and the system it is designed to keep your hormones balanced. And last week we did a really cool episode on what your cycle is and how that system kind of works and what are some things that might be red flags. And if you haven't watched that, you might want to, because that's a good place to start, because today we're going to chat about cycle syncing. This is a hot topic. I feel like syncing your cycle to everything. Here's my caveat that I think happens a lot is everybody wants to jump on the cycle syncing trend, but not a lot of people want to fix their cycle, and you don't want to sync to a cycle that sucks. That's like my motto. Yes. And so I think that, take everything this is why I want you to listen to last week first, because if you have some of those red flags, what we share about cycle syncing and how your body may change energetically, nutritionally, and its demands from week to week during your cycle may be influenced from your hormones being balanced or not being balanced, or specific phases needing a little more support, or specific phases being shorter or longer than they necessarily should be. And so if this information feels a little confusing and you're like, that's not really how my body's been working, go back and see if you've got any of those red flags that we talked about last time. And also know that everybody's individual and everybody's body responds differently, and everybody has a different cycle and energy levels. But we're going to hit on some of the main pretty common things that can really give you a leg up in understanding how to increase your energy, your productivity, and your body's overall function. We talked last week about our bodies being functional, and what we do is help you work with the design your body already has and the system it already has to keep things balanced and to keep you feeling energized, control over your moods, beautiful skin, making a lot of babies if you want to. It's basically, again, how women are designed to function. So with that, exactly. Leisha's going to kick us off going through, each week. Typically a menstrual cycle has 4 weeks. Some people have longer menstrual cycles. If that's the case, the first thing we want you to do is know when you're ovulating, and then we can help you figure out why is your menstrual cycle too long or too short. And then the next thing we want you to do is contact one of us so that we can help you fix this because your ideal is going to be have each of these phases of our cycles, each of these weeks of our cycles are really designed to help a woman feel recharged and energized and fully supported, not only in whether or not you have things to accomplish in your day, but also in things like DNA repair, protection, cancer reduction. There are a lot of things that go into how our bodies are designed and why they're designed to be so cyclical over a 4-week period, that even if you're not necessarily worried about if you're producing a lot or have a ton of energy, you want to care about this because your body, again, this system is influencing every single organ, every single replication of your DNA. And it's really important. So kick us off, Leisha. It might even be helpful if Leisha starts with masculine versus feminine energy. What do you think?
Yeah, I can start with that. And actually something else real quick though, is I just wanted to say, if you are not having periods, it's actually not a good sign.
No.
And I think mostly we know that, but also sometimes it's kind of convenient to not have a period. And so I just wanted to say absolutely what you said is true, that our bodies were designed to have this once a month blood flow. And one of the main reasons, something that I'm, definitely researching more into, is just that we are able to actually get rid of some excess things, especially excess iron in our bodies. And although this is a whole other thing, we'll talk about this another time, but even though sometimes we feel like anemia is an issue, a lot of times we are having heavier cycles because we have iron toxicity and we don't have enough balance with bioavailable copper and retinol, which is vitamin A in our bodies. And your body, again, like is always working for you. And so even like heavier cycles can be a sign of an imbalance that isn't even necessarily related to hormones, and it's more related to minerals and iron in your body. But also if you're not having cycles, or you're having like super long periods between cycles, like you might not actually be getting rid of iron the way that you need to. And so there's a lot more to that, but I just wanted to say, like, really is a goal, even if your cycles have always been 50 days, like closer to 30 is going to be better for your body. And if you're having shorter cycles, again, like closer to 30 is going to be better for your body because you're going to have more time with progesterone in your system. So with that being said, I'll do a quick little rundown of kind of like the masculine and feminine energy, and then like where that shows up in your cycle will come up as I talk. But masculine energy is kind of the energy that we see running the world for the most part, in my opinion. And it really is more of that energy of like, go, 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 work hard, and even kind of just like kind of that more like what you would think of with testosterone. So like a little bit more in your face, a little bit more structured, things like that. And feminine energy tends to be a little bit softer and a little bit more flowy. And with that being said, I think that sometimes we have been like conditioned to think that that's like not as good, or that's like more weak. But I really think that within all of us, we have masculine and feminine energy, and we are created to be that way. And that it's not about your gender or your sexuality really at all. It really is just there are different phases of energy. And so I'm going to talk about both of those types of energy as we go through a hormone cycle. And they really do have to do with our hormones, but they also have to do with our conditioning and the way that we've grown up and like what has been valued. And so I'll just say, like, I definitely lean more into masculine energy a lot of times, and that tends to cause more burnout for me because the feminine energy is a little bit more like being versus doing. And it's really easy for me as an ambitious woman to be like, I can just go, go, go. I can do all the things. So understanding my cycle has been huge in realizing that there are times to go and there are times to be, and there are times to rest. And so that's why I think that some of this is so important.
Yeah. And I think just one thing real quick is for everyone to understand, like males and female, like males have estrogen and females have testosterone. So when we talk about like estrogen, or when we talk about feminine, masculine energy, again, we're talking about these hormones that exist in each of us. And then I think the other thing that's just super cool, I love to add in, is one of the reasons I think it can feel like we live in a very masculine energy dominated kind of like world is because men's testosterone, their energy, their recharging phase happens every 24 hours. And for women, it happens every 4 weeks. And so the reason it feels like that is because we live in a society that tells us every 24 hours we need to wake up and produce, and that our only time to recharge should be at night. And for women, that's not the case.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I love that. I think that's a huge important piece. So going through this 28-ish day cycle, what we start with, we're just kind of going to focus on it as like every phase is 7 days. And when you start to understand your ovulation, you will know a little bit closer where you are specifically. But if we're talking in general terms, we're going to be talking about like weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so week 1 is when your period starts. That's going to be your period week. And so during your period week, generally, women will have, especially in the first few days, to be honest, like lower physical energy sometimes, and also lower social energy. And so what that means to me is that a lot of times you'll feel like a little bit more introverted. You might feel more like you want to be alone, or you want to be just at home. You want to be cozy, and you don't necessarily want to be like out running around. And so with that being said, everyone is going to be different, but just actually paying attention to like, if you feel like that on your period, that it is okay to feel like that, and that you can even lean into it and use that to your advantage, I think is really important. So during this phase, you actually have the most connectivity between the right and left hemispheres of your brain. And so this is a really good phase of your cycle to be able to plan and to kind of like analyze as well. And so when I'm cycling, which I'm still postpartum right now, but when I'm cycling, I really like to actually start this as the start of my month as much as possible. And so that's the time where I'll do things like I'll make plans in my business. I'll make plans for our personal schedule. I'll do meal plans, things like that. And for me, it feels so encouraging and empowering to know that like this is a time that I can do this best. And also, like maybe I'm not necessarily feeling like I want to be like out running a million errands or like throwing a birthday party. And so if I know that that is coming, then I don't necessarily have to push myself in that way. And I can plan like, okay, well, this is my day that I'm going to like do all the things at home and like be sitting down, like figuring things out with my brain versus like running my body. And so with that being said, during period week, a lot of times this is a little bit more of an inflammatory phase. And so nutrition wise, I really like to focus on things like turmeric and ginger and just like anti-inflammatory and also just like really nourishing, warming foods. And so I've actually seen personally a difference in period or not period cramps, but like post baby cramps with warm foods. And so I'm excited to try this for my period as well. But I really think that like going back to that a little bit of like Chinese medicine perspective of like nourishing and warming and loving your body in this phase is just really, really helpful. And so I always like to almost like create some little routines and rhythms around my period that make me look forward to it because I don't have painful periods anymore because of the work that I've done in my body and because of like just the things that I've learned. And so with that being said, like I might still be a little bit like, feel like a little bit heavy in my uterus or something like that. Or maybe like when I'm bleeding, I don't necessarily feel like I want to like run around. And with that being said, like when I know this is going to be my planning day, this is going to be like where I'm focusing my energy, where I can best serve my family today and serve my clients today, then I can add in some little routines that are going to make it feel really good. And so I'll do like golden milk the first day of my period, or I'll know that I'm going to create space in the evening to just like take a really leisurely walk or spend time in the sunshine or something like that. And again, just knowing like what fills your cup and knowing that in this phase of your cycle, you might need your cup filled a little bit more and you might not have quite the like roaring energy that you might have later. And that's okay. And that you don't have to feel bad about it. You don't have to feel guilty because this is where you are for a couple of days. And then like the next phase moves on. So Heather was going to talk about some kind of like red flags and other things during period week.
Yeah, just a couple caveats here. One being that, so your hormones pick up around day 3 for most people. And so sometimes you may feel that like hyper analytical, inward focus, everybody leave me alone. I find around really when those hormones start getting to those minimal levels. So for me, it's closer to like day, like 2 to 3 days before my period starts. Because that's when those hormones are really dropping and then they stay low. And around day 3, when the hormones pick back up, is actually when I start to notice that I don't have a lot of those same types of like energy depleting kind of feelings. And so again, just remembering that like you can take the phases that we're talking about and recognize where they're happening for you once you kind of know and understand what's going on. And then the only other thing, I mean, I think we hit on everything, but one thing I will say that I notice is a lot of women feel like they can push through their period. And so we just do. And a lot of times we have to, because we have to work or we have to launch or, whatever it may be.
Or we have to take care of our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I see happen though, is that they do fine doing that. But then around week 3, when they should still have energy, when their hormones start to dip, your hormones dipping to signal your period coming should actually be like this really slow, steady, kind of like gentle dip into your cycle. But if you're pushing through your period and not allowing your body to rest and recharge, it'll push through with you until it can't anymore. And usually it's about that 3-week mark that I notice it can't anymore. And so when someone says, I just have terrible PMS or cycle syncing doesn't work for me, or I have plenty of energy during my period, I actually like to ask them, well, what's happening around your PMS week? Because that's a pretty good indicator of how well you're truly resting and recharging during your period.
Yeah. And I just want to say like caveat, same thing that Dr. Heather's saying is like, I'm not saying you can just lay around for like 7 days during your period. I definitely agree. I'm really thinking of like the first like day or 2 of your cycle, that this is kind of like a little bit of the inward focus where you slow down a little bit and just creating that space where you can And also just not giving yourself that excuse of like, well, I'm not getting control of anything. Everything has to be busy all the time. No, you can choose in many cases to at least find 15 minutes in your day that you're going to honor your cycle. And so I have 3 children, I have a business, like I'm busy all the time. And I think it's just really helpful to kind of have that mindset of like, all right, how can I serve my body today? How can I honor my cycle today versus like, oh, I just can't, everything's too busy, right?
And
Like
this is
10
a
minutes
great
is
week.
better than 0.
Oh, sorry. This is a great week to use your like easy buttons too. So don't get a house cleaner every week. Get a house cleaner this week. Don't use Instacart every week. Use Instacart this week. You know, don't sign up to be room mom. Do it a different week. Like there's definitely things that we do have some control over that you can add in here. So
absolutely.
Go to our next phase.
Then going into second week of your cycle, like Heather mentioned, your hormones do start to pick up like as you're about halfway through your period usually, and you start to really notice that usually at the end of that first week. And so this follicular week is the second week of your cycle, and that's where your body is preparing for ovulation. And so on like most of the time, you will start to have a little bit more of that masculine energy show up where you start to really feel like you have more energy to kind of like do all the things. And so sometimes this shows up, it can show up in several different ways. So creativity can often increase during this week, but also social energy, I think, really rises as well. And so this is the week where often we do best with more like bigger social events, or if you are planning something in your business, or if you're planning something for your family, like maybe even a family vacation, or something big that you want to have like your best social energy for, that you don't want to feel like you just need time to yourself. Like this is the time for that type of thing in your cycle. And so as you're moving toward ovulation too, knowing that this is the time that you're fertile means that this is also the time in your cycle where date night is going to be most enjoyable and where your libido is going to be highest, because God created our bodies to crave reproduction. And when you're in that fertile phase, that's when you're going to have the highest libido. And so even like, I think libido will have to be like a whole totally other episode, because there's so much we can say about that. But I just want to tell you that like, it is normal and fine for you to have ups and downs in your libido throughout the month. But if you never have any libido, then that is usually a sign, especially if you're not cycling, or if you are cycling. If you're not cycling and you're like just postpartum, that can be pretty normal to not have a high libido as well. And there are things that you can do to make it like not 0. But with that being said, like this is a phase of your cycle where your libido may be higher, and you can enjoy that and plan for it versus feeling like, what the heck, like where did this come from? And so phase 2 is where you can generally kind of like increase exercise. Usually in phase 1 during your period, it may not be the time where you're necessarily going to like hit records on weightlifting or anything like that. But as you start to go into phase 2 and even phase 3, this can be a time where your body is more stable for higher intensity exercise, if it feels good to you, if you're in a place of safety in your body. And so I just wanted to say that. And then with nutrition, I like to focus on like fresh foods and things that are really supportive for vitamin C. And so like fresh fruits and bell peppers and things like that can be really helpful to just give your body the nutrients that it needs as it's preparing for ovulation. So that's kind of like the overview of phase 2.
Yeah, I feel like that's really good. I don't know if I have that much to add to it, except that I do have a lot of clients that like don't feel that great during ovulation. And so if that's the case, that's usually a sign that something's off with estrogen progesterone balance, because this is a transitional period or transitional time during your cycle. And so when transitions are difficult, it's a sign that your body's needing support in its natural hormone balance system. So if you're noticing that like you're actually feeling fatigued and having headaches and no libido and cravings the week of ovulation, it's usually an indicator that your balance needs a little support.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then week 3 is after ovulation has occurred. And so if you're tracking your ovulation, you don't have to just go by like day 14. You can actually just know that like the day that you ovulate is the last day of your follicular phase, and then you move into ovulation. And ovulation is the phase where you're going to have that rise in what is going on with my throat all of a sudden? That rise in progesterone that I talked about. And that kind of usually creates a little bit more like a calm, steady energy in this third week of your cycle. And I absolutely agree that if you hit it too hard at the very end of your last cycle or during your period, like the end of this week could start to get a little rough. But usually this is a week where you can continue to be fairly productive, but you have a little bit more of that calm energy versus the like higher energy of follicular phase. And so I really like to just kind of keep this phase of my cycle as like a almost like go back to the things that I planned in week 1 and kind of see how I'm doing with those things, like do a little reassessment, go back to all the things that I was working on in week 2 and just kind of like almost like tidy up, right? And just kind of like continue to slow and steady get things done. With exercise, this is a good part of your cycle to be able to like continue at a pretty moderate pace if you are there with exercise. And then also just knowing that from the first part of your cycle, the focus is kind of like on reducing inflammation, the weeks 1 and 2. And then the second part of your cycle, weeks 3 and 4, I really like to make sure that our bodies are detoxifying estrogen well. And so through food, that can be kind of like bitter greens, lemon juice, apple cider vinegar, kind of little digestive tonics before meals. What we're wanting to do is just help support the liver in healthy bile flow. And then a lot of women like to do cruciferous vegetables for estrogen dominance. And I don't think that those are, I think that they can be overdone, but I also think that they can be supportive. And so even things like specifically like broccoli sprouts can be really great in moderation in this part of your cycle. And then also like if you want to eat cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or Brussels sprouts or kale, that's totally fine in moderation as well. But if you have any questions about your thyroid function, I really recommend that those are well cooked versus eating them raw, at least a lot of them raw. And so in that second half of the cycle, really supporting your liver and making sure that your body is moving and that you're drinking water and that you're sweating pretty consistently can help reduce estrogen dominant symptoms. And even some other like kind of like pro tricks like castor oil packs can be really helpful if that's something you're struggling with in this phase of your cycle. And then in week 4, do you have anything you want to say about week 3?
I just wanted to clarify because I think you were calling it ovulation week, but like you won't have, so basically follicular phase is going to go, it's going to be, this is where I think like the weeks can kind of get confusing, but you'll basically have period, follicular phase, and then you'll ovulate, and that's around a 3 to 4 day period. And then you go, or time frame, and then you go into your luteal phase, which will carry you through the second half of your cycle. So I just wanted to clarify that because ovulation itself might not be a whole week for you. So just kind of know that, hey, as you start noticing that cervical mucus approach, the end of your follicular phase, by the time you've seen a shift in your temperatures and your progesterone is dominant, your estrogen has already plummeted. And so then you're kind of entering that second half of your cycle. So just to make sure that that's really clear, that you're not necessarily ovulating for an entire week or needing to necessarily like focus on that. I find that once progesterone shows up, which is going to happen within essentially like 24 hours of your ovulation, you're going to kind of be in more of this luteal phase, which is around what we would describe as week 4.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. And I do call it ovulation a lot, but really what I mean is post-ovulation. And so I need to think about a different word for that.
I think it's hard again
but I do think that there's a difference in the feeling of week 3 versus the feeling of week 4. And that's why I don't just call it all luteal. And
that's
so that's
why I
why
was going to say, like that. I think it's hard when we put our cycle phases into weeks because they don't actually last a week. And so it's hard but that's what you're being taught. Like if you're researching cycle syncing, like that's what you're being taught, like this week. So I think it's easy to like explain it that way, but also kind of knowing when you know your cycle that, hey, you might be ovulating. I kind of think that it overlaps like beginning of this week into end of this week, beginning of this week into end of this week, just depending on how your cycle flows. But you usually have about 10 days in each one.
Yeah. So it's official. You and I are going to revamp cycle syncing, and we'll be back with an update.
We need to, because ovulation is going to be the only time you have around a 4-day phase. And then you're going to go into what's called the luteal phase. But just like Leisha is saying, the beginning of your luteal phase, so right after your estrogen's dropped and you've ovulated and you have that boost of progesterone, it's going to feel really different than a couple, 4 or 5 days before your period starts. There's a big difference in those two phases, even though they may occur within the same week.
Yep. Yeah. I love that clarification. Thank you. So then when we kind of go into that last week of your cycle, this is the week of your cycle that I always recommend starting with, honestly. If you're like, I don't really know about cycle syncing, it sounds kind of confusing to me, like start here and come in with a mindset of nourishment, because this is the week that usually can be the week that everyone hates.
Like PMS week is what we're talking
about. Yeah, PMS week, the week before your period starts. And so with that being said, it doesn't have to be bad. I absolutely think that, like, I have experienced plenty of times, like great weeks before my period. And so with that being said, again, realizing that like this is where we shift more back into that feminine energy, and where we shift into sometimes like the lower social energy as well. And so when you start to feel that, like, a lot of times I have noticed this, and I've had other clients say this as well, that they'll almost like feel like nesting at this phase where they're like, I want to get everything cleaned. I want to get everything finished up. And the truth is, like, this is the end of your month and this is the end of your hormone cycle. And so a lot of times it can be that phase of like, especially the first couple of days. So like the beginning of the week before your period, you might feel kind of that, like, I want to kind of like finish up projects. I want to like finish things up. And then you might kind of feel like you just want to slow down for that last couple of days before your period. And a lot of times this is where those mood symptoms come up, like PMDD, PMS, like feeling low, feeling irritable,
anxiety, insomnia.
Yeah, all the things. And with that being said, my best advice for this phase of your cycle is start to understand your patterns, like we talked about last time. And then once you know, like, okay, 3 days before my period is always when it starts for me, or like sometimes it's 3 days, some days it's 4 days, whatever it is, then whatever the day before that or 2 days before that is, like, that's where you start just like loving on yourself, nourishing yourself more. And I always recommend actually scheduling some self-care. And when I say that, I don't mean like a spa day. If you want to do a spa day though, go for it, totally fine. But for a lot of us moms, like, really, I just mean giving yourself like an hour when your husband gets home at night, where you're like going to go do something by yourself, or you're going to go to bed early, or you're going to take a walk, or you're going to focus on doing some of the things you know are supportive to fill your cup or support your hormones. A lot of us already know the things, we just haven't necessarily implemented them. But this is the week where you really can get basically like the most bang for your buck. And so this is where at the end of this week, your hormones really do start to drop off in preparation for your period. And so again, like that lower social energy can be there. So this is where you just like kind of can give yourself a little bit more space, focus inward a little bit more. And of course, you're going to need to do the things that really need to be done, but maybe you don't schedule to like do the extra things in this phase. And you just kind of give yourself, I totally agree that like the couple days before your period start and the couple days after your period start should be like a phase of its own, because that feeling is often the same.
Yeah.
And I do know that some women will say that like they have symptoms right before their period, and then like as soon as their period starts, they feel better. So with that being said, like week 4, again, just like focusing on truly nourishing, supporting your body, and just knowing you actually, if you have cravings, especially like sugar cravings, carb cravings, there can be a very solid reason for that. And it is because you actually need some more calories in that phase. And so just using those calories in a nutrient dense way can be super supportive to even like feeling better in this phase and not feeling low.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple other pieces here. So understanding that what's happening during this phase is that your estrogen and progesterone should both be dipping together. And the reason that self-care and nourishment and everything is so important during that time frame is because if you are low in progesterone, or your estrogen is too high, or there's an imbalance, then that slow dipping is a crash. And that's why you feel the crash. And I actually have I have a course on stress hormones, because stress hormones are the #1 driver of this week being a nightmare. And it's interesting, what made me think of it is because we have a self-care strategy in there that talks about like, how do you actually take care of yourself all month long, so that by the time you get to this week, your stress hormones aren't calling the shots anymore. And I think the course actually should be renamed about like boosting progesterone. But it's essentially just again, something to remember, that the self-care matters, because it's helping to lower those stress hormones, which is going to help every other phase cascadingly get better. So
Yes.
if you have questions, oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, throughout the entire month, caring for yourself is going to be huge. But if you're starting, like, start here.
Yeah. Yeah. I usually say, so I do it a little different. I usually say to start the week of your period to actually rest and recharge the week of your period, and then things will cascade. But Leisha's had success starting this week too. So kind of pick your poison.
It depends where your symptoms show up, I think.
Okay. So that's it. We are going to be back. We have a lot of different episode topics for us to keep flowing through. So if you are noticing like, hey, I need support in these areas, or my hormones need support in general, or I just want to dive deeper into what this would look like for me, that's definitely something you can reach out to either of us for. And then your reminder to always subscribe so you get notifications with our new episodes we put out each week, and join our email list where we expand and give you some extra tips on what we talk about in the episode. And then we both have our resources available. We run different programs to help women balance their hormones and really experience symptom-free months. And not only that, but also get back your energy and your productivity and feel the way you were designed to feel by using your core function and how your body was designed to work. So reach out to us. Instagram is probably the easiest place. I'm at Dr. Heather Rhodes. Leisha is at abundant_life_wellness, right?
Abundant.life.wellness.
Oh, I was
Surely
so
you'll find
sorry.
me.
Dot, not
It's fine.
underscore. Perfect. Okay. We will chat with you guys next week.